What's going on, everybody? Patrick on here, and welcome back to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. I'm here with my dude Aris Pina, who's of course my brother in boxing history dumb. Everybody knows that. We're here to talk a little bit of kind of history, but look, it's a holiday week. We're keeping it pretty light. We're talking about things that we personally are thankful for, whether in boxing history or contemporary boxing. Like I said, keeping it light. What's up, Aris? How you doing, man?
How's everything, man?
Can't complain too much, bro. Like I said, it's a holiday week, which means my children will be home all day for the next 3 days. Fuck. Sorry. I'll
Oh, you
find a way
guys
to get
are
through it.
starting tomorrow?
Yeah, dude. Yeah. They did, bro. I remember when I was a kid, they'd give us like a week. Like we'd just be like gone the entire week, but they've been fucking around with their schedules and stuff like that. So, hey, it is what it is, man. It's holidays. That's what we get. It's our
Sure.
penance.
Yeah, no, I don't know. For Thanksgiving, I remember the fuck did we do on Thanksgiving? Um, I think I still went to school on Wednesday. Pretty sure I did. Or maybe it was like a half day on Wednesday. I don't know. It's been so long. I can't remember, but I feel like I went.
Also, I guess it also matters too. Sorry to interrupt you, but we were in California, so we didn't get like snow
Oh,
days. That shit
okay,
never
yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah. Maybe so that might be it. I have no idea, but I feel
So
like we were
yeah,
at least
make
one
up
day.
snow
Another
days
full
and
day
shit
or
during the
something.
holidays.
But Thanksgiving was always, you eat and then I'm aging myself here. That's when wrestling was still aired on Thanksgiving Day. So you watch either like Starrcade or before they got the kaput by WWE Survivor Series. And that's what I kind of grew up on, you know what I mean? So you'd sit down there, eat your ass off, and then you would watch fucking, I don't know, Hulk Hogan and three like guys that were gonna get destroyed early on so he could be the main dude wrestling Earthquake and three other guys, like something like that. You know what I mean? It was always just good times to watch stuff like that. And yeah, that's what Thanksgiving was.
There was a time, I mean, I can't recall off the top of my head what fights, but there have been times when fights have happened on Thanksgiving pretty early on in the day. But regardless, those days are pretty much gone. We don't really get fights on holidays or anything like that these days. Pretty rarely.
Well, I mean, Japan's always been consistent.
I was just gonna say, yeah, maybe Japan.
And if you got nothing to do on New Year's, you're not much of a partier, which is like the majority of us now, it seems
They
like.
always do it up. Yeah.
And it's always bangers too. Always been bangers over the years. Like they stack those cards up.
They
That's
used to
their
do that shit on Pride. They used to have
Mhm.
Pride FC New York or New Year's Eve cards that were fucking wild. That shit was great.
Sure. So, I mean, you got that, but like to have actual fights on like Christmas or anything, nah, that's not even close. The closest we're getting this year is what the rematch between Usyk and Fury on the 21st.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day too. I was actually kind of surprised that they're going on with that. Shit's in Saudi Arabia though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't give a fuck about.
What's
Yeah,
that?
I mean, why would they? But they don't give a fuck about the holidays.
Yeah,
No,
no, no.
that's true because I was thinking about that the other day. You don't really see them even that close to the holidays really often. And I mean, understandably, because if I were a fighter, I wouldn't want to be fucking keeping, well, whatever. And you never want to keep in shape, but even worse during the holidays when there's fantastic cooking and shit.
Well, doesn't correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Berto gonna fight Shane? So, Andre Berto was supposed to fight Shane Mosley like the day before Christmas or the day after Christmas. It was right then. It
Good
was like right
question.
then and then, right before the earthquake I think that happened over in Haiti and that kind of like, canceled plans because Berto went to go help with the cause over there.
Let's go. Let's take a look because I don't remember when the date was. Okay, January 30th.
Oh, the fight was supposed to be January 30th?
Yeah, that's what it
Oh, okay.
says.
Interesting. There
Still
was
though, they would have had to keep their shape through the holidays.
no, there was a fight that was supposed to be. I don't know why I'm remembering this. I don't know what. I feel like Mosley was involved or something, but there was supposed to be a fight before Christmas or like right around that time because
I
I,
don't
I
know.
I got asked if I could work that back then, and like no one was the holidays, and I was like, yeah, I don't give a damn about Christmas. But now I'm curious who was supposed to be involved. It was supposed to be an HBO show back then.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Clearly it didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. We don't really get fights around the holidays all that much. Even like, dude, there used to be fights all the time on 4th of July, and we don't even really get that shit like now.
Yeah, Halloween.
Yep, yeah, we just fucking talked about that not too long ago. But hey, dude, I we're often not all the time, but we often focus on some negative stuff, whether it be like true crime That's often kind of sad, tragic, negative, according to a lot of people, or in the views of a lot of people. And also, I mean, look, dude, there's a lot of negative stuff in boxing. I mean, that's just a fact. So it's easy to focus on. That being said, dude, we're also, I think, thankful for a lot of stuff that we get to experience, a lot of stuff that we get to, pour through, sift through, and et cetera. Like, what would you say in the spirit of this week? What's your cornucopia of fucking giving thanks in boxing here?
Sports still alive in general.
For now, yeah. Yeah.
Like, think about it. Remember that T-shirt you made a few years back where the headline on the newspaper said "Boxing's dead," then you had a bunch of mini headlines all over it. How many times has the sport just been like pulled through the dirt, and deservedly so for various reasons, or undeservedly so for things that just kind of transpire inside of it? That there's been countless amounts of just uproars, whether it's been from fans or whether it's been from like well, not actually fans, excuse me, like people, like anti-combat sports people. And I mean, from
Yeah, yeah,
people,
critics or whatever, yeah.
yeah, yeah, from regular critics all the way to like high-profile doctors. I remember there was a doctor who, and well, you got to haul at every like basically KO magazine from like 1980 up until the early 2000s now. And in one of them, one of the KO magazines, I want to say they were doing a compilation of the 80s, like the best of the 80s, or everything like that, because it was the end of the decade, and they did a list of the 50 most influential people in the sport or whatever,
They did it a
something
few
that
times, yeah. But yeah, you're right.
done it times over the years, yeah.
Mm.
But in that one of the guys that was mentioned as one of the more influential people in the sport was this doctor who was anti-boxing to the core. That he many times he would come up with various stances of why the sport should be abolished
Yeah,
and
I'm pretty
various
sure he was
things.
like a neurologist or something.
Yeah, I cannot remember his name. I see his face right now. Glasses, beard, his whole thing, and but he was like a high profile person who many times came to light talking about the abolishment of the sport. Definitely during the 80s when Dooku Kim with Ray Mancini and other instances of that matter, and just in general. And it's not like he would just say that, be like, oh, boxing's dangerous. No, he came with a lot of facts and data and all the stuff like doctors would do. You know what I mean? Like when when they got something that they're attached to, when they're trying to run with it, I mean, that's what he did. And so to that point, he was mentioned as one of the 50 most influential people in the sport just for what he did in the stances of trying to abolish the sport. But think about that, so you have that just in that matter in general, like, the brain, the injuries and things like that, and people want to call for the abolishment of that stuff. And then you just have the absolute corruption that's happened over the years because boxing is the easiest sport to just enter into. I mean, at least one of the easiest, and just make your influence or whatever. There's no type of like, barrier or like where they're checking your qualifications or where you come from or what you've done or what your past is or anything like that. There's no background check. Whatever the fuck you've done, no big deal. If anything, it's probably going to help benefit you because you got street smarts. So all that being said, excuse me, this sport has been around in some way or another and its variations since like since the 1700s, you know what I mean? And you go through those eras from the very pioneer beginning level, all the way from the James Fig, Mendoza, Richard Humphreys, all that era, all the way up till the bare knuckle era, and Jem Mace and others, and then the precipice of like the gloved era with John L. Sullivan, and then just everything going from there, and then with the mob involvement and all that. Sorry to sound long-winded, but like the fact that this sport's still alive after everything is is a major miracle.
You can definitely apply a lot of that stuff to combat sports in general, to pro wrestling, to mixed martial arts. But of course, one of the major differences, and it's a really, really, really key difference in this regard, is that pro wrestling has gotten itself far more organized.
Yeah,
You know, mixed martial arts kind of, through monopoly, not so much through organization or anything like that. And it's not that dissimilar to pro wrestling, has also gotten itself far more organized overall and is a far tighter package to fucking sell. Where boxing is still really scattered. There's still a lot of scattered interests and all that type of stuff. And it's been far more difficult overall to consolidate all of that shit. However, we are seeing recently that That's kind of what's happening, generally speaking. Basically, for years we heard a lot of people, like namely like Oscar De La Hoya, that dude was talking about it for forever, about how he was going to turn boxing into the next UFC. And I mean, it was laughed off, and
Hmm.
rightly so, because it requires a lot of fucking money to do that. uh, you know, Dana White didn't just snap his fingers and go, "Here, UFC, be this way." He took a lot of fucking investment money and a lot of, cash to basically turn this shit into a massive machine. And that's essentially what is happening right now with Turkey Al Sheikh. Overall, he still hasn't gotten everybody, as we've seen in the fucking press with Canelo basically, giving his middle finger. Tim Tszyu tried to do it, but couldn't uphold his end, which was keep winning. And in any case, we're starting to kind of see that. However, even so, boxing has still really been resistant to that kind of organization, and it's also been really tough to kill. It's been a fucking Teflon Don like a motherfucker, and it's bounces back every time. And that was kind of one of the reasons why I made that shirt, was because I thought it was funny that every fucking time there's something, and then Turkey Al Sheikh, boxing's dead. And I'm just kind of like, you guys don't get it. This is not, it's never, ever. Even if it fucking gets abolished, it's going to be underground. It'll still be fucking boxing. They'll still do it. Doesn't matter what you fucking do.
Boxing was
So
basically abolished in the early 1900s as it was. Think about, or the late 1800s. How many of those guys, all-time greats, in fact, had to go and do that secret location type thing until you didn't know until noon that day where it was going to be, pitch a place in the middle of like turf, somewhere in the middle of the woods or wherever it had to be, just because you had to avoid
so
all this stuff. So like,
so many missed movie script opportunities
yeah.
here when we're talking about shit that happened in real life, where motherfuckers would have like a little fucking like coded piece of paper where
Mhm.
that was the location, but they didn't know what it was because they didn't have the code, and they had to go fucking ferry it to somebody else so that everybody could buy tickets, but they didn't know where the fuck they were going. And then they'd have to set out in the middle of the night to fucking avoid police, and then sail down the fucking river to go fucking some location. Like, what the fuck? That was real. That happened. It happened all of the time. And I mean, that's crazy. But here they are. They want to talk about fucking some lady, breaking her neck on a stool, and that wins an Oscar. God damn it. Regardless,
It's absolutely insane, right? When you got a guy like Jim Corbett and Joe Kowinski fighting out there, fighting on a barge,
I
like.
mean, yeah, like that shit was an epic fucking movie scene back in the day, but we can definitely improve on it. The Errol Flynn,
I mean, just like, oh, of course, but like things like that, you know what I mean? Like it was just a. So what you were trying to say is like if boxing got banned, which is never going to, you know what I mean? But like, say something drastic happened where everyone just kind of abolished it. Yes, they would find its way to still make things happen, and still things would get done. Like it's never
people
gonna.
will pay to watch other people tear people apart. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter. Doesn't matter.
there's a way. If there's a will, there's a way. But yeah, it was just that's the thing. It's just like the sport. You know, the fact that like I fell in love with it as a person that wasn't a major sports dude growing up. Like I like basketball and a few other things, but falling in love with boxing and making sure that that was the sport that kept me off of like the streets and everything like that. Because it did. Instead of being hanging out and running around with the crew I could have been, I was just keeping my nose in the gym. And if I wasn't in the gym, I was home just reading old books and just trying to learn as much as I could. And yeah, I mean, I learned at a young age how how corrupt the sport was. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Quickly learned about Don King and his instances. You learn about Bob Arum or whatever he did. You go back into the 40s and the 30s and 50s and wherever it might have been from. Either it could be, Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo, or you go back to like Jacobs Beach where and Jim Norris and the IBC. And there's so many things you can talk about in this sport that you just kind of like, oh my God, because it is bad. You know what I mean? Like it's absolutely insane when you can see how the sport was controlled and how these guys were just basically pawns or puppets, even world champions in the scheme of whatever these guys wanted to do to make moves and how they can maximize their profits on this. And, the people that were left alone in the dust to begin with too, right? Like the guys that wouldn't cooperate and so would end up in the hospital or sometimes even dead because of it. Like it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. But here we are today. It's 2024 and the sport's still alive. So yeah, that's all. That's what I'm thankful for. That we still have a sport in general.
For sure. And especially I think with the way that not to get too wide or macro here, but the way that social media has taken over everybody's lives, not
Yes.
criticizing whatever, that's a different conversation, but it simply has. And that has also been the primary way for boxing fans to interact and figure things out, et cetera, in the last, 10 to 15 years. And so because of that, and also because of the way that like social media in the last few years has been really like turned around and it's gotten kind of fucking weird the way that it shit is operating. So it hasn't been as easy to follow and to stay in kind of communities or whatever on social media. So that being said, yeah, dude, I'm with you. I'm happy that it's still a thing. I'm happy that we could still fucking enjoy it. And for my part, I think that kind of piggybacking off of what you said, I'm very thankful and happy that I have as much access, and everybody does, but I have as much access to the history of the sport and, the things that have been chronicled in the sport as I do, because, it's something that we have a really big advantage, not specifically you and I guess, but I guess also in a way yes, because you and I are probably a little bit better at looking things up and finding things than others. But looking back on people in history who have also kind of kept track of the history and looked things up, researched, etc., some of the more famous people we now know, one, they had to spend so much time and effort to do what they were doing, because whereas now I can go on to like a newspaper archive website, or I can go onto a genealogy website or Boxrec or whatever. Back in the day, all the way up until maybe about 15 or 20 years ago, you had to go to a public library, or sometimes they had to go to fucking, the Library of Congress and shit like that. I mean, it's pretty crazy the amount of effort it took to keep track of a lot of the things that they kept track of. And so to have the kind of access that we have now is pretty fucking amazing. It really is. And so I also feel like because of that, we have a much better like variety of viewpoints that we can look at and get a better idea of shit that like of what actually happened. You know what I mean? And so that doesn't, I'm not saying that we're better than all of the historians that came before us and shit like that, but we simply have better tools. And I think I'm really happy about that. I'm really grateful for that, especially because you and I, like, we do pay attention to contemporary and modern boxing. Like we love boxing and it is what it is, but we also spend like a kind of like sickening and probably ridiculous and stupid amount of time researching and reading about old shit and stuff that already happened. So because of that and because of our insane fucking, obsessive interest about that type of shit, I'm happy that we have that shit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy because like past historians like the late great Hank Kaplan and others, for them like trying to preserve the history of the sport, he didn't have the access of like the internet or anything like that. He just had a chronological and um saving shit from like the early, just as he just got involved with the sport at like a young man. And it got to the point with him where he had two um giant garages, like, parking garages just filled with memorabilia. That was all his stuff. And he was known as a night owl. So Hank would do what he would do is that he would sleep during the day, get up in the afternoon, go about his business or whatever, right? But then like his prime times were at night from like 10 p.m. until the wee hours of the morning. He was down there in his basements going through, filing things over there, going through this, peeling through that, making phone calls, talking to people that needed information, everything. If people knew when to call Hank, and that was like after hours was when you were going to get into him. But that was a historian back then. Hank was better than anyone at it. You know what I mean? Like everybody that needed info, you went to Hank. But that being said, like you said, Pat, um, it's so everything is at our fingertips now, and that's like amazing. You know what I mean? And
Not
you
everybody uses it, of course. We know that, but
1000%, 1000%. But it's like it's crazy too because like a guy like Turkey, who we just mentioned like a second ago or whatever, um, he he just purchased the Ring magazine, right? And there's been a lot of, discussion about that. Some people are in agreement with it. A lot of people are not in agreement with it. I don't know, man. We all have our opinions on that too. We could really go into detail if we want to, but that's not the episode for this today. That being said, one of the things he said he's planned on doing was that he plans on digitizing the entire library of the Ring. And if he were to do that, which would be no easy task considering I'm not even sure if Ring has access to the entire library to like that. You know what I mean? I only think there's a few in existence who have an entire collection of Ring, and
I
the Ring
think I
archive
remember
is
Doug
somewhat.
saying, if I'm not, sorry to interrupt you, but I think I remember Doug saying, if I'm not mistaken, I think I remember seeing him say that they do not have a complete collection.
No, they don't. It's been like that for years. I remember reading that as a kid that they said that they were one
Yeah, I'm
of all the
pretty
people
sure
that
I
own
saw him say
complete
that.
collections. The Ring magazine was not one of them.
Yeah, there's like five or something. Like it,
Yeah,
yeah,
the Boxing Hall of Fame, as far as I know, has a complete collection. Um, Hank almost has a complete collection. I don't know when it stopped, but I mean, I know he has all the way back to the very beginning. When I was archiving his stuff, I remember coming across a box with like some extremely old Ring magazines. I don't think it was the first one in there, but we're talking the first few years. And I like tried to slowly pick up one of them, and it started crumbling in my hand. I
yeah,
started,
bro. That shit
oh
was
my
printed on papyrus from fucking fourth century Egypt.
I literally picked up just like half a page and it started just crumbling like a broken cookie. You know what I mean? I just like quickly dropped it, closed the box, and shoved it away, and then sneezed
Yeah,
because all the
dude.
stuff came up in my
Fuck.
face from
That's
that.
yeah, almost all of the early ones that I see, if when I do, which is almost never, are like bound or like,
Sure, they're all down. Yeah.
yeah, modified in some way. 'Cause I mean, dude, they're even we've talked about this before, but different eras of magazines were printed on different kinds of paper, and different papers hold up differently. And I'm telling you, some of the shit from the 40s and 50s, for instance, is like I barely touch it ever
Yeah.
because it's like fucking so fragile. Every time I go through it, there's just a littering of fucking like magazine shit. Like, and I'm like,
Hmm.
oh God. So I can't even imagine. And I do have some shit from the 30s too, and that shit actually is on really good paper and it holds up really well. But going back from like the early 30s back, it's like unhandleable.
Oh, it's horrible. And to see how like when you pick it up, it was just like crumbling in your hands and all that. So, um, if they're able to digitize, I mean, even if it's not the full library from all the way back to its first magazine, but like decades worth from like the 30s, 40s, 50s up until today, that would be huge for people that, historians or just anyone trying to look for data or anything. That would be absolutely huge. That being said, there's so many things now at our fingertips that we didn't have before. Like you and I growing up, Pat, we just had pre-internet, we just had magazines and books. You know what I mean? I had that book from Nat Fleischer and The Pictorial
Yep.
History of Boxing. Great book. Don't get me wrong. I mean, some of the stuff inside of it now I know is factually incorrect, but that being said, it's still an immensely good tool for like people trying to
Oh
learn.
yeah.
The bare knuckle portion, especially for the heavyweight part, is immaculate. Like that's where I learned the majority of my stuff. And for the most part, that holds up through other historians, like the same way of like just what went down. And photo wise, they have incredible photos, like old photos up until,
Yep.
whenever. So you can, I would learn from that. And then we just had an array of boxing magazines, which we were lucky to have back then. You had Ring Magazine, you had KO, there was World Boxing, Boxing Digest, Boxing whatever year you want to add to the end of it. Like there was a bunch of those. And that was the way we just kind of learned history was from all of that, you know what I mean? But fast forward now, the average fan today, if they really want to get into it, you have BoxRec, which is an incredible amount of an incredible tool of just anything you want to go through. Like gives you the world champion list from beginning to end, gives you this, gives you that. Every single like complete record you can possibly recognize to its fullest extent, all the way from like George Dixon to whatever you need. Like it's there. And I love that for them, you know what I mean? And yeah, it's beautiful now for for all of us in terms of just wanting to know like real information and not just kind of going by like the hearsay um of old historians and other managers and whatever it may be back then who just want to pass along the history, but also do it in the context of what they feel is favorable to them or whatever they believed. Then we can get the real shit now.
And like you were saying too, we know that some of the things, like some of the dates, some of the results, et cetera, some of the records, were not factual back, some, and it's not to overly criticize necessarily the historians of old because they didn't have those tools and they thought that they were presenting facts. They weren't intentionally misleading people. I mean, I think that there were some people and some times where they intentionally exaggerated shit for effect and for the purpose of a good story, which serves its own purpose and I don't necessarily have a problem with, but there we need to also differentiate between what's factual and what's a story. And but the point is, with all these tools, we can better do that now. And one of the really good results, or I'm sorry, one of the really good examples that I like to use, and I've brought up a handful of times, and it's not to constantly go after Burt Sugar, but it's because it was a championship fight, and because it was a high profile example of not only Burt Sugar, but several historians have repeated this over the decades, that when Stanley Ketchel lost his middleweight championship or his claim to the middleweight championship to Billy Papke in their rematch, for literally decades, they said, oh, it was because Billy Papke sucker punched him right when they went to shake hands and it hurt Ketchel and he never recovered, which in and of itself doesn't even make sense. They went to shake hands and he sucker punched him and nobody said anything or didn't, that doesn't really make, but okay, fine, go with that. But the problem is that literally not a single ringside account. And now, because of where it happened in California, there's like 9, 10 different newspapers where we can look up direct ringside results and not just like an Associated Press report or a generalized report. And we also now know that a lot of those generalized reports was like a game of telephone, dude. That shit got changed, shit got molded, edited to fit this little square. That was the whole point. And so, in any case, now we look at all these ringside accounts, none of them mention that. Not a single one mentioned that. And in fact, almost every single ringside account mentions Stanley Ketchel hitting Papke first, like in after the bell ring, like normal fight. It makes no sense, but this thing was repeated for decades. And now we can look back with these tools and say that didn't even happen. Like this was repeated on produced programs from HBO and shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? But nobody was double checking this because perhaps they couldn't. But anyway, it's cool that we're now in the position that we can look at a lot of that stuff, with more factual eyes.
It's true. And one thing to touch on with those Ketchel Papke fights is that everyone, especially a lot of people back then, talk about how vicious they were or whatever it may be. There's bits and pieces of some of their fights on YouTube, and maybe it's just because of the quality of it or whatever it may be, but those fights look like they fucking sucked. Like they didn't look that exciting
A
at all.
lot of mauling,
A lot of mauling and growling, things like
pushing,
that.
and
Mhm. And before anyone be like, well, that was the era and stuff, listen, there's clips also of Walgas Nelson, Ad Walgas battling Nelson, and that's very, again, grainy, hard to see footage. But even through then, you can see the ferocity of how those two are
yeah,
beating the
that was
shit out of
vicious.
each other. Yeah. You can just see it. You can see the punches being thrown. You can see that there's mauling, but they're clearly like beating the hell out of each other while they're mauling. It's not just like a grappling match where they're trying to get the advantage. And then there's like a few body punches and uppercuts here and there. Not to diminish what Papke and Ketchel did to each other. Clearly, those were tough fights on all of them. All of them were. But like, I'm just saying, aesthetically watching that, I don't see like a Zale Graziano. But
For
uh,
me, it felt like just kind of like, Wolgas and Nelson was more represented more of kind of like the next step of like infighting or
yes,
whatever, whereas Ketchel and Papke were like a throwback to like the fucking like bare knuckle days, and people loved that shit because they
yeah,
were, like the oldies, the fucking crusties loved that shit. They're, oh yeah, I love fucking John L. Sullivan. This is just like that, where they were in there and grappling with each other and doing this type of shit and fucking. Rah. Whereas, Wolgast and Nelson were using their fucking footwork to maneuver and create angles and shit like that, which, those fights were vicious, but there was also a lot of skill there for sure. And they were both tremendous infighters, like in a way that we now would recognize in fighting. So, yeah, for sure.
It's interesting too, like when you watch, and I know back then they would enhance the sound a little bit for the punches, ding, 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 right? For everything, but you would still hear, I mean, like watching it, just like I forgot what round it was, but you see Walgas just rip Nelson with an uppercut. And even then, through that grainy, black and white footage, you're just kind of like, oof. Because you can just imagine, like, I don't know if I'd be able to handle being ringside for that. First off, that was long as shit. Second, ah, man, that was one of those fights that you'd be like, all right, you know what, man, I think that's enough violence for today. I gotta go. But, anyways,
And
back to
Oscar Nelson is reeling.
how long has it been now? 2 hours. Um, the thing though that sucks that I mean to think it on the other side though is that like all right we have all this information basically at our fingertips now whatever you really want to find in terms of history wise it's right there. That being said, we still have this whole host of young ignorant stupid ass fans who come out there and want to argue with you about how Floyd Mayweather is the greatest of all time and that Sugar Ray Robinson was a bum because he has 19 losses on his record or this guy wasn't be that good or Sugar Ray Leonard lost, you know what I mean, and just want to like add to their agenda of why this generation's better than the past generation without doing their due diligence, even though it's right there for you to look up.
You know, I tried. I tried to do my part. I got too many copyright strikes from all the promoters posting the videos where I'm like, hey, this is what this fighter looked like from 1921. What the fuck? But hey, it is what it is. But yeah, you can't create curiosity. You can't force someone to want to know about it. And you and I just happen to be, I guess, people who are curious about it because I looked at, when I was a little kid, dude, I was excuse me, I was always into like trivia books, fact books, and shit like that. I loved Guinness Book of World Records books. My parents used to get me old Ripley's Believe It or Not books, which of course I know now was filled with bullshit, but nonetheless, they were entertaining. I loved that shit. I loved the trivia and the facts and shit like that and pop culture type stuff. More of the trivia and facts, but in any case, similarly, like the books like the Pictorial History of Boxing was perfect for that because it's like little chunks, little bite-sized chunks for like somebody who's like a kid but maybe not too young that could go through it and be like, "Oh, that's cool. Oh, wow, that's cool." And but of course, that was where it stopped when we were little. Like you couldn't just then go, "Oh, let me go look that up on the internet." If you were lucky, your parents had like a set of encyclopedias, and if you were lucky, that fighter was in an encyclopedia, which they fucking almost never were. So I had one of those. I had parents who would be like, the go look it up. I'd ask them some shit. They'd be like, go look it up. And I'd be like, fuck. So regardless, that was where it stopped for us. And, yeah.
Yeah, dude, it was crazy, but with the advent, like I find myself on BoxRec all the time. You know what I mean? Just falling down rabbit holes for whatever it may be. Like where they have random pages for I mean, I'll just be looking up anything, right? Like I'll just be in my one of my old magazines and you'll see a new face that I don't remember who he was anymore. And so I'm like, all right, let me go on BoxRec because it's the easiest way to see how his career panned out. And then you click on his record, and then you say, "Oh, he fought this guy." And then you click on that record. Oh, then blah 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 blah. And before you know it, you're like 30 pages deep, just going down some kind of shit that you don't even anticipate doing in the first place. You don't know how you got there, and you know why you did this. But here you are 45 minutes later, and you got every type of information you needed about the IBF Intercontinental Junior Bantamweight Championship. And it's like, uh, but I'm thankful for that. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm happy to be able to have that type of access and to be able to look these type of things up. And not every fight on BoxRec has like that that little Wikipedia where it gives you like a description of what happened in the fight. I wish it did. But even then, just the thorough records of what it may be, the pages that the sub pages that they go down. I mean, hell, like we talked about, they have a page for murdered boxers that's like 3 pages long, which is
Yeah. They have a
insane.
whole bunch of lists. Like,
Yeah.
and people might not even know how to navigate to that portion of the website, but like, there's all sorts of
It's
random
down to
lists you can
everything.
look up. Yeah.
Yeah. From like every Olympic class that you can imagine, from the first all the way to the current. Um, world champions from different countries, all this other stuff. Like it's absolutely invaluable. And I mean, how much is it a month?
It's like a dollar or two
Oh,
or something.
yeah, right? Like unless you're a promoter or a manager or a fighter who needs
And
like extra access to something, yeah.
and I think that yeah, and I think that I just paid for like a year or something like that, and it was like $20 or it's something like that. I don't even remember, but it was like, look, dude, there are certain things where I'm like, I'm not fucking paying for that. But there are certain things where I'm like, that is worth paying for. And the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is, you and I alone probably like keep Box Rec in fucking business in terms of website visits, bro. We're
Sure.
on there all of the time. And so I mean the amount of time that I use it, how invaluable it is, the fact that what if like you just woke up and Box Rec was like, sorry, we shut down today. I'd be like, what? I'd trip. I'd fucking trip, dude. I'd be like, that's not good. So in any case, if my fucking measly $20 or whatever it is could help prevent that, I will give them that money.
Hmm. I feel you. So another thing for me that I've just grown to be thankful over the years because they become so scarce now. And that's another thing about how the sport's evolving. Everything's just like high profile shows. But I mean, listen, I guess if you go look for them and it depends where you live, these things still exist. But like club shows, like, when I was a kid, I didn't go to many live, fights and stuff like that growing up. Like I grew up in like people listen to the show, I grew up in Massachusetts, and growing up as a kid, no, I don't want to see that the New England boxing scene was dead per se. It wasn't alive and well, but it was kind of sputtering at its point, right? You know what I mean?
It's
Like,
been ebbs and flows, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Ray Oliveira was kind of he was treading water at that point. Ray picked up steam in the late 90s. I'm talking about the early to mid 90s. But like Ray was kind of treading water at this point. Jason Pyers was about to turn pro, so he hadn't really picked up a lot of steam. Scott Pemberton, same thing, had just started his career. So the guys that would be the pillars of New England boxing in the late 90s were still just kind of like not really there yet, right? And instead of that, we had Peter McNeely. Um, I love you, Pete, but I'm just saying that was like the peak of New England boxing in the mid 90s. Our buddy Gray, who we were just talking about on Box Rick, would definitely attest to that. Gray Johnson, that is. And so we had Peter McNeely and Joey Gamache was in Maine, so I'm not even going to consider him a part of really New England because I was like not that close to us. You know what I mean? Gamache wasn't like fighting in Boston or Brockton or anything like that. And yeah, New England boxing was kind of doldrum. So if there was going to be any type of club shows, it wasn't happening in New Bedford. Like the last New Bedford show happened in the early 90s, then there was like a absolute dearth of it for almost a decade. And my folks weren't going to take me to like Brockton or like say another like surrounding town near like the Boston area for a fight because why would they, right? So that being said, my first fight ended up being in Taunton, Massachusetts, in I think 1999. My first pro show I went to. Yeah, that was a ESPN Friday Night Fight show. James Toney fought Ramon Garbe. So yeah,
I
James
remember that
Toney.
guy.
Yeah, he was he was one of those Cuban. Ramon Garbe was one of those Cuban fighters that came around the time of Diablo Hurtado, I think a little bit after him, but
I
he
want to
just
say
what?
he wasn't he who Yoel Casamayor was with.
Yeah, actually, I think you're right.
I don't want to swear to it, but I'm pretty sure.
Oh no, they came around the same time. It's correct.
Well,
Because
I mean, I think that they like defected
yeah,
together.
so like Hurtado, I remember reading about him because he was in the same New Faces article in Boxing Digest with this other Cuban fighter who's not as well known named Mario Iriban, I believe his name was. But they came earlier on the early 90s, right? Because we all remember Hurtado when he fought Whitaker soon after that. But Casamayor, I want to say, was what, 96 he started coming? I think he came here around then.
Something like that, around there, yeah.
Yeah. So Casamayor and Garbe. Because that sounds about right. Because Garbe obviously didn't have the same pedigree at Casamayor, but he had some momentum going for him before it
Yeah, he
became.
was talented, but like
He just let
just
himself go, sloppy, all
yeah,
that.
unfortunately kind of fell into a lot of the same patterns that many of the Cuban heavyweights who have come to the US did.
Sure. And by the time he fought Tony, He was already sputtering. So, but that was my first show. I saw that. I think Jeff Frazier from Contender fame, he was on the undercard and a few other guys. But when I moved to New York in 2007, I started working for DeBella in 2008. And Lou at that time, New York boxing was really healthy going on. You know what I mean? DeBella was putting on a lot of club shows. DeGuardi was putting on a lot. Joe DeGuardi was putting on a lot of club shows. Cedric Kushner, my future boss after Lou, was still putting on a lot of shows. Like there was stuff going. There was a lot of activity going around back then, right? You know, you had John Duddy, you had Peter Quillen on the come up, Joe Green. I don't know if you remember that name. And
Is the Mean Joe or
Mean Joe
yeah,
Green,
Mean
yeah.
Joe
The guy
Green?
that fought he's the one that fought Vanis at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
All those guys, like New York was alive and well. And that's when I started doing club shows and started going to them all the time because I was working for these guys. So I was just around it. And the atmosphere for those club shows, man, was just something different from like going to like a major show at say MSG or anywhere, some in Vegas or
It's like
whatever
the
it
people who are
was.
there want to be there. Like they're there for the boxing.
Absolutely. And, not all the time it's going to be featuring major big names and stuff like that. It's like a lot of times you're going to be seeing future champions because these are like, young local guys on the come up. Some of them make it, some of them don't. Sometimes it features once in a while a former world champion, on the comeback trail, kind of trying to get their career back on track. Like Randall Bailey, who I watched a few times because Lou signed him and like others like that. And I just loved it because of the intimacy of it too, man. Like it was never really like in big venues. It would always be packed out and it would just be with genuine fans. And the thing too about these club shows that I loved is that this was like pre-Twitter and like pre all that type of like, everything has to be on your phone and just like show that you're showing out and all that shit. And so everyone was just like invested into the fights and into the show as opposed to like trying to show that they're there. You know what I mean? Or like doing meetups or arguing or whatever these dudes do whenever they see that. Cause these dudes be rolling up on each other at fights. Yo, you so and so. Yo, y'all want to fight? And I'm like,
Half
and
the time
sometimes
it's like one of them's working the fight or something like that. I'm like, what the fuck are y'all doing, dude?
and just why in general would people like pay money to go to a fight, pick a fight, and then get kicked out and banned from that place? Like, make it make sense.
It
Like, if you're
doesn't.
really about it, go find, set up a location to go do it. Like, I saw two dudes on Twitter did. They went to a random parking lot and they like slugged it out and got rid of their differences. I mean, it's pathetic to watch, but at least they did it. That being, I mean, I'm just like, but everyone would just be invested in, of course there was fights at these shows, but it would just be drunk people getting in arguments about whoever they were cheering for, which in my opinion is fine because that happens at every sporting event, whatever. But like, it was just, I don't know, man. I just love the atmospheres of all of that. And then also too, especially with Lou shows, he would always have like, a bunch of like local former world champions just kind of go out and show up over there. So you would see Junior Jones, you would see Iran Barkley. I remember seeing Wayne Braithwaite, remember the cruiserweight champion? He would be
Yep.
there
Big truck.
times. Yeah. And a few others, like, and I know on your end, you can attest to that as well for the West Coast stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, unfortunately, it's definitely not as busy up here in the Pacific Northwest overall. I mean, there are kind of pockets. There's actually some underrated pockets too. Unfortunately, they're not super close to me, but like the Tacoma area, sometimes around Seattle, and then obviously Southern California. There are a couple little pockets in Northern California too. Sacramento and the Bay Area sometimes have some fights, but um, yeah, Southern California especially. It sucked because San Diego, it was like the wrong time. In the early 90s, there was a whole bunch of fights at the sports arena in San Diego, and like Terry Norris fought there maybe like five times or something like that. And I caught one when I was young, and but like beyond that, there was like I didn't really go to any fights or anything like that, and I never really knew of any club fights. And I mean, I probably wasn't into it enough to know of club fights. But then by the time I really started getting into it and I could go, the club fights had kind of dried out, and there was really only one bigger or like notable promoter, this dude Bobby Hitz, who like some people know him. Yeah, like he's been around and shit, but he used to put on fights, and it was funny because long story short, we went to a number of fucking fights and club shows in San Diego and we're trying to support that scene and shit like that. But each and every time it was getting like more and more difficult because for whatever reason, like the actual process of getting tickets and knowing about the fights, there was like zero promotion. And I lived in San Diego and was like covering boxing all the time, and I wouldn't even know about the fight till like fucking 2 days ahead of time and shit like that. And then on top of that, the very last time that we went, again, long story short, I swear this is the end. My wife and I went to go to that place because I was like, oh shit, I just found out today there's boxing. And because she's a G, is like, hey, do you want to go to the fucking fights? And I was like, fuck it, hell yeah, let's go. So we went and we were literally standing at the front of the venue waiting to buy a ticket for like 15 minutes and nobody ever came out and like there was nobody there. And we were like, what's going on? Like we're trying to get tickets to get into and we're like looking and there's like a fight happening and shit. And we're like, there's like empty seats. Like there's like so we didn't go after that. We were like, okay, I guess they're fucking this shit up. So in any case, that sucked. So it was just kind of a timing issue, specifically in San Diego. Go to LA, it's a totally different story. There's shit all the time. Like there's like, and on the outskirts of LA, in the city of LA, all the fucking time. And so there are certain pockets around the US, kind of like how you started saying, where there are local club scenes that are doing well, especially in kind of like places where there's a bigger population and stuff like that. And it's just, they're able to pull fans. But unfortunately, there are kind of like a lot of smaller club scenes and Golden Gloves, like cities that used to hold really prominent Golden Gloves tournaments that don't really anymore. Indianapolis, Chicago, Detroit. Some of those places still do hold them, but just not with nearly as many competitors, etc. So, I mean, it would be nice to see those places that used to have good club scenes also kind of come up. I'm happy that there are still some pockets though, because
Oh,
that
yeah.
it would be really, really bad for the sport for there to be none.
I mean, totally. Like the boxing used to be the backbone, used to be club shows. I mean, that's what people used to run shows all the time. So when we would hear about like old trainers, excuse me, legends like Ray Arcel, Whitey Bimstein, and others talk about their past and how they were coming up, and they would say that they were literally working almost 6 out of 7 days a week. They literally were working almost 6 out of 7 days a week because of all the club shows that were going around the city every single day of the week. Not every show was a big MSG show. At least once a week they're at MSG doing a big fight. But until then,
Yeah,
they
imagine that, dude. Place is like a fucking 15,000, 20,000 fucking spectator venue, and they're just packing that shit like every week or every other week.
Mhm. And
It's
on top of
nuts.
that, though, you'll go into like the Brooklyn, Eastern Parkway Arena in Brooklyn, or you had to go to this place or that. And these are like local club shows that they're putting on. And they had promoters who were promoting these shows and their jobs, their responsibility of the matchmaker was to come up with fights every single week for these things to pack them out and good ones too. You know what I mean? If that meant that, like, sometimes you had to use the same guy over like a couple of times, like Teddy Brenner talked about how when he first used Gene Fulmer the first time and he saw Fulmer training, he was like, "Oh my God, this guy is absolute trash. I can't use him." But he was convinced at the last minute, no, no, you gotta put him through. And he looked so good that for the next week, the fighter that was supposed to fight, I forgot who it was, pulled out. And since Fulmer looked good and didn't really get unscathed, he called up Fulmer's manager. Teddy Brenner called up Fulmer's manager. I think was it Merv Jensen. And it was like, "Yo, you guys still happen to be in New York?" And they were like, yeah, we're on our way heading back home now, but like technically still here, I guess. Why?" He was like, "You guys still want to fight next week?" He didn't really get touched. And he was like, how much? Throw you a number. He was like, Gene, you want to do it? Shrugs his shoulder. Oh, fuck it. And there you go. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it had to be done. I mean, clearly the club showed the evolution of club shows have changed where, you can't, they're not doing it every single week now. Now it becomes like, it became like once a month or every few weeks or whatever it may be. But that being said, you still just had like that intimacy of the shows. Like when Lou was doing club shows, he was holding it as Broadway boxing shows at a place called BB King's, which was a music venue, rest in peace, in Times Square. The best venue you could watch music at for like a really nice, intimate venue, sit down, or if you want to, like, get close to the stage. I saw Gil Scott Heron there twice. I saw a few other acts there. Everything was always, I saw Pete Rock and CL Smooth there one time. Rakim, like just right there up close where you can like give them high fives. You know what I mean? Anyways, same thing with the fight. Imagine putting a ring there, a ring right in the middle. You had like get set up where, you had the booths and stuff like that for like the VIPs, but everything else was SRO. And always good fights. You know what I mean? Lou had good matchmakers, and there was always be really good competitive fights. And sometimes it would spill out into the audience. The first time that they promoted a show at BB King's, I remember Vinny Matalone wasn't in the main event. He was like co-main event. And Vinny Matalone was a fun fighter back in the day, right? The was he from Jersey or some upstate New York? I don't know, around
I,
there.
to be honest, I don't remember where he's from, but he's definitely from the East Coast for sure.
Yeah. Just a big lughead, you know what I mean? A lovable guy that, very, very limited in every aspect of the way,
He
but
served his purpose for sure.
sure. And he made for fun fights though. But long story short, um, I don't know. Before he got into the ring, as he was entering the ring, some of his rowdy ass drunk supporters got into it with some Irish dudes about something. And before you knew it, glasses were being thrown. I was standing there with a date. I had to grab her and kind of move her out of the way while she got all wide-eyed. And these people started brawling all around. And then Big Lou jumps in the middle. Hey, what the fuck? Stop that shit. And he tries like breaking it up before security came in. But I don't know, man. It was just I love club shows and I love the fact that they are like, they are alive and well in certain places out there. You know what I mean? More so than others. New York still has them. They're more sporadic than what they are because it's just the way it is now. And but back in the day when I first came here, you had Lou doing them. Like I said, Cedric had a bunch that was still going on. And so did Joe DeGuardia. And I would go to all three of them. They would always be held in Manhattan at somewhere, or sometimes in Brooklyn or wherever, but no matter what, it would always just be a good time. And you would just see a variety of people, not just the fights, but just the people that would be there. Like you become friends with just the same people, the faces you start seeing all the time. You know what I mean? Whether it's the former world champions, whether it's the managers and other promoters that end up going there because they all go there to support each other or just watch the talent or whatever it may be. You know what I mean? So it was just always a good time.
Yeah, dude. I'm not gonna lie. I do miss that. I do miss, even though I've definitely gotten jaded and cynical as to the kind of people that are generally involved in boxing overall, I do miss the kind of whatever camaraderie or whatever you want to call it of going to fights in Southern California or in Vegas and seeing the same people, all the time and knowing who was going to be there or, that kind of thing. I do kind of miss that. But yeah, those kinds of things make boxing healthy, and I do appreciate that. For me, I am thankful that Jake Paul's promotional company sent out a press release letting us know that Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul was not at all fixed, because otherwise I wouldn't have known.
I know, bro. You know, I don't even know. I don't even know where to begin on that whole thing. Like, well, that was an absolute fucking fiasco from beginning to end. We all knew it was going to be. I
I'm thankful Mike Tyson didn't die. How about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. There you go. That's what
I
I'm
mean,
thankful for, man. It,
especially at his post-fight comments talking about he was exsanguinated and he almost died or he died twice or I don't know, but I didn't remember what he said. My fucking heart stopped beating. Who the fuck? I mean, bro, we're talking about. I know that he had some back issue during the Etienne fight. The interview's still hilarious. For him to go final is still fucking hilarious, and the idea that any sanctioning organization or fucking state commission or anything could ever possibly sanction a fighter who, number one, is as old as he is, and number two, is now post fight claiming that he like died twice or almost died twice. He's having fucking whatever sort of episodes or issues, and they still sanctioned that shit. That's an indictment. That's not a good thing. That's not like, this is bad. I'm thankful for the comedy in it.
I mean, but hey, this is boxing. This is again. There's no shame, and if there's going to be money to be made, they'll literally
Yeah,
wheel
not
you out the wheel.
surprised.
Like, man, there's no big deal. They'll figure it out. I mean, think of all the guys that have gone through the ringer beforehand who were in much worse shape than Tyson, even though they were younger, and they somehow got sanctioned for fights, like Jerry Corey, Ernie Shavers, Ron Lyle,
Aaron
uh,
Pryor.
Aaron Pryor. The Aaron Pryor fiasco is on YouTube if you want to go find that, because that is one of the most pathetic, saddest, so many different words you can use for that. And that wasn't even his last fight. keep that in mind. He fought one more time a year after that, and that fight somehow went 7 rounds. There is no footage of that fight anywhere. I'm not even sure if there's a complete card of it because I showed it to Gray one time, and he even said that the whole thing just looked like an absolute sketch show. So, I mean, I couldn't even imagine what the footage of that fight would look like, even though morbidly I want to see it. But it's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? That was the thing. The Tyson thing, the thing that was funny about it is that everyone did buy into it, including me to a small degree, because I really think Jake Paul sucks. Like, I'm not even gonna front. Like, yes, has he improved? Sure. I mean, is he a legit fighter? I'm not gonna call him a legit fighter, but just because of the people that he fights. But I mean, he's legit in the sense that he does take it seriously.
He's a boxer.
Yeah,
That's where a lot of boxing fans are going to get mad. Is you're going to call him a boxer and he's a real fighter, and
he
people are
is.
going to go, "What? How dare you?" I don't. You can get mad all you want. He's a real fighter. He's going in the ring and he's fighting other fighters. He's fought other boxers. It is what it is. This is
And I
all a
mean,
big game.
the Anderson Silva fight was legit to me, even though Silva was like old as dirt and a guy that's not really like primarily a boxer, but he was a dude that slapped the shit out of Julio Cesar Chavez
He's
Jr.
actually got some hands. Yeah.
and actually has hands. And like out of all the MMA guys that have come over, as a guy that clearly shows he's like probably the best at it when it comes to boxing, maybe. And so Paul beat him, you know what I mean? Dropped him and went through it with him and stuff like that. And the only guy he lost to was Tommy Fury, who he
Right.
did.
We're
Who
not
he
saying he's
dropped.
top 10. Yeah,
Yeah.
at least you and I aren't. We're not saying he's top. We're just saying he's a legitimate fighter. Is he like a good fighter? No. That's okay too. Whatever. But that's the thing is that like we knew Tyson's old and decrepit and crotchety and crooked and shit, and we already know where Jake Paul is. So the question is, the question was Mike Tyson so old and so past it that he couldn't bridge the gap because he was still a better fighter even at his age than Jake Paul? And the question was no. He's
Yeah.
too old. He couldn't do shit. And Jake Paul had learned just enough to keep the fight, fucking there. And he could jab him and he could run away and he could do whatever. And Mike Tyson sold. He couldn't do shit about it. That's pretty much the only question. You know what I'm saying? But even so, that was the only question. And that many people still watched that shit.
You know what though? For like the briefest moment in the first round too, when Mike came out in the first 30 seconds, he came out aggressive, like we all knew he would, right?
People got that feeling. They
Yes, I
did.
did too. All right, I'm not even gonna front because the thing, if anything with Mike, he still had muscle memory. That was there, right? Like his body wasn't reacting to it, but his brain clearly knew what it was supposed to do, and it had like the same
Yeah, he
movement.
had like four
Once,
bob and weaves in him,
yeah,
a
and he
couple
landed
of
a couple of
hooks, and then
punches.
that was it.
Like he landed a jab, he landed a couple of other shots, but if you looked at Paul's face initially, like within the first like 20 seconds, he did have those oh shit eyes, like oh no, like
He's
this
like,
is
"Oh, she's really coming at me. This is
yeah.
Mike Tyson."
And
And then
like
he's like,
not only that, he was
"Oh,
like, oh, he was like you could
he's
tell
over."
for a quick second, he was like, oh my God, did he really turn back the clock? But then, Mike just
Yeah, no, this fool been smoking weed constantly for several years. We're no.
yeah. Oh, Mike. I mean, I'm thankful that I grew up during Mike Tyson. Well, I didn't grow up during his prime, all right. I was only 2 years old when he became heavyweight champion of the world. So I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, I was like, sitting there watching television when Mike Tyson was rampaging the division. But I'm thankful to say that I was still like a kid who grew up in the Mike Tyson era in the sense that like the early 90s, Mike Tyson still held the command over the world and the country. You know what I mean? Like as one of those guys that you just knew who he was, even if you didn't watch boxing really like that, you knew who Mike Tyson was. As a kid, you knew who Mike Tyson was. Like he was just one of those guys that I remember when you were going to school and people would ask, would you do so and so for $100 or what would you do this or that, or $1 million? One of the questions would always be, would you take a punch from Mike Tyson for $1,000 or would you do something like that? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And like, we had Punch Out the video game and then becoming a fan of the sport. And Tyson was one of the few guys back then that was accessible in terms of watching footage of him. And, there wasn't like, because we were just talking about, how like in boxing history, trying to find footage, like just trying to be a historian back in the day was more difficult because of what you had to go through to do it, right? And especially that came with footage. I mean, YouTube, that's another thing you can mention. Like YouTube, before that came through, all we had to do was rely on like videotapes and kind of like, sometimes they would play fights on television, classic fights on ESPN or some shit like that. When Classic Sports Network started, that got us all excited because we thought, oh wow, now they're gonna start showing the fights from Caton's collection, and for the first time, we're gonna have access to like all these all-time great fights. And then quickly it became Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano on a loop, a couple of Jack Dempsey fights, um,
Ollie Foreman like nine
Ali
times a
Foreman,
day.
yeah, yeah, you know what I mean, and like things like that. Duran Buchanan once in a while, but they also play Tyson fights, and that's what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? Is that Tyson was one of those more accessible guys early on to see his footage if you were becoming a fan and just getting into it, as opposed to like trying to find I don't know Salvador Sanchez, right? So that was the thing is like I just growing up there in that era was just different, you know. And then when you're a fan in the early '90s and he was just released from jail, and you're like, oh shit, he's coming back. Like you know, Tyson's gonna rampage again, and they were building this whole thing up, and then now for the first time you're gonna be able to see him actually like you know fight. Um, excuse me, fuck, I'm losing my voice again. You know, you're gonna be able to see him fight live as opposed to just like watching, you know, highlight videos of him against Larry Holmes or Trevor Burbick. Like, oh man, here it goes. And when he got in that ring that time, and you know, you see the eyes scrolling and all that, like it was just goosebumps. You're like, oh man, this is heavy. This is heavy, dude. It was just a different time. Like people that weren't there, you know, we become those people now since we're like in our 40s that we're those people that have to like explain to younger generations what it was like. You know, we always used to joke about that. Oh, we're never gonna be that old to be those boomers to talk about back in my day and da da da. But when it comes to talking about Mike Tyson, we grew up during that era. We can talk about that.
I mean, as people, you perhaps can't tell by listening. Although obviously I'm not like a young whippersnapper if you're listening, but if you look, you can see a fucking gray in my beard, you know. But I remember when I was a kid, dude, because I'm a couple years older than you. But when I was little, you know, I've made jokes about it in the past that like Americans bond, like American families bond by watching TV together and shit.
Yeah. Right.
It's not a joke. That is absolutely truthful. Not every family bonds that way, but traditionally, you know, growing up in the 70s and 80s and shit, that was pretty common. And that was one of the things that we used to do as a family is we used to fucking watch sitcoms and shit like that. And I remember Head of the Class was one of those sitcoms that used to come on and we used to watch every so often. And so I knew that Mike Tyson was the boyfriend or whatever of the chick who, you know, who Robin Givens played on the fucking show. And in any case, I knew that. And then I also knew not long after that that when we had gotten Mike Tyson's Punch Out, that Mike Tyson was that guy. And so he was the fucking scary heavyweight champion. And, you know, my family wasn't so into boxing that way that, you know, I didn't know all the characters. I didn't know all the fucking fighters and everything. So it took me a while to learn that shit. But then when he came back, like you said, I was a little bit older. I was able to see, you know, a more prime version of Mike Tyson than we obviously saw the other night. So we have very different personal memories of that type of shit. And it, even if you didn't necessarily watch him fighting, you knew of him,
Mhm.
you knew. So similarly, you know, we carry that shit with us and we have a little bit different experience of that shit. Whereas, I mean, fuck, if you're born in, you know, 2000, you're 23, 24 right now, which is fucking crazy to even consider. But if you were just that old, then you only really know Mike Tyson as the funny guy from a couple of movies who used to be a fighter and that people talk about in some weird way. You don't really know, which is
Mhm.
okay. I'm just saying that you don't really understand the kind of phenomena that some of these figures, you know, the aura that they had about them, that people, you know, they did some shit and everybody was talking about that shit the next day at school. You know what I'm saying? Like that was Michael Jackson, fucking Michael Jordan, Mike Tyson, you know, maybe a couple of other kind of boxers or whatever, but the type of shit where they did something and everybody was fucking talking about it the next day at school. And
Dude.
so people don't know that shit.
Oh yeah, when he fought McNeely, that was during the summertime, right? I believe it was.
I want to say like June something. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember I was in like summer daycare camp or some shit. And that Monday, when we were on the bus getting ready to go on our field trip to wherever it was going to be, um, one of the counselors got on. He was like, "Who watched the Tyson fight?" All the kids in the bus, including me, we all raised our hands. We all watched it because we did. Everybody watched that shit. And then when a bunch of kids started yelling the exact time that it ended and what time what kind of punch he hit him with and all that, and where everybody was yelling, "I like Mike," and everybody was like, Mike was just a phenomenon back then, man. Was he the best person? Absolutely not. Like, just go through back. That's another thing that made him fascinating and captivating was that he was just a walking time bomb from I didn't experience Mike that type of Mike growing up because I was only 4 during his uh path through hell of 1988 and 89 going into 1990. You know what I mean? Like that dude was just on some next level shit of being insane back then. But that was another thing that kept America captivated by him. You know what I mean? It was just like you didn't know what he was going to do back then. He was going to freak out on the camera. You find out he's beating up Mitch Green at 3 in the morning on the Harlem streets. He's going crazy with
Yeah,
Robin
getting fitted
Gibbons.
for a suit at fucking 2 a.m. and then getting into a fight. Who the fuck's
Getting
doing
to it
that?
straight up. You know what I mean? Imagine you were going over there and then like I read about that passage the other day and it's absolutely hilarious. It was that Tyson exactly. He was at Dapper Dan's at like 3 in the morning. And then to the average person who's not from New York, or if they just moved to New York and it's kind of comes from like a nice affluent area, if you try to explain to them that there's a clothing store that was open 24 hours, especially in the wee hours of the morning, they would look at you and be like, wait, what? And when you tell them where it was located, and then they'll
And
give you even
and,
more quizzical.
and
And
then
then when
it
you explain
catered
to
to and then it
catered
catered to like celebrities and shit.
yes. But not like when I say catered to celebrities, not like, the guys back then that would be popular like Tom Cruise or some shit.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah. Like
celebrities like Mike Tyson and
celebrity G's and shit.
street hustlers and all these other people, like just straight up like a crowd you shouldn't be around. But it
Yeah,
was
dudes from around the way that everybody knew.
absolutely, but just a crazy aura. And you got Tyson walking in there getting a jacket fitted. And it was the summertime.
I wish I
There was
was
a bunch
there.
of same here, bro, because I would love to see how that shit started too. Apparently, Dapper Dan said there was a group of teenagers outside, or like young kids, preteens outside, that were just, looking for something to do, even though it was like 3 in the morning, they should have been home. And they saw Mike Tyson walk in. They knew that Mitch Green was around the block, probably doing what he was up to. They go over there, they saw that it was there. They were like, yo, Mike Tyson kicked his ass. And he was like, he's at Dapper Dan's right now. And convulsed him enough that Green decided to go waltz over there to go pick a fight. It's typical day in the life of Mike Tyson, but I mean,
There was so like they each gave their own fucking versions of the story and shit like that, of course. And Mitch Green was saying Mike ran up on him, started talking shit, hit him, and then ran away.
yeah.
And that's what Mitch Green's version was. And Mike said that, and I don't know, but Mike gave a couple more details, so it seemed to me like his was a little bit more believable. According to Mike, he said that Mitch Green came in and he was all pissed off, but he wasn't mad at him. But he was like, "Hey, man, fucking Don King owes me a bunch of fucking money. He didn't fucking give me money that he was supposed to give me. Like, there was something he was supposed to give him or a bonus or something like that for their fight. I don't know if it was like he was, he lasted the distance, he was get a bonus or some shit like that. But regardless, he was like, "Oh, Don King owes me money, blah blah blah." And Mike was like, "I don't give a fuck. I don't go fucking talk to Don." And it just kind of escalated from there. And then finally, Mike, they squared up, and Mike fucking hit him and broke his hand, and wound up like instead of fucking sticking around for the cops, like they took off and shit like that. And Mitch Green spun that as he sucker punched me and he ran away when Mike was probably with not. I think he said he wasn't with an entourage, but he was with like some security or something like that.
There's
But
literally a photo of Mike trying to put his hand out to shake Green's hand before that whole altercation started.
yeah, there's like a photo series of it, which I didn't even know existed until like a couple of
Hey,
years ago. And I saw
yeah.
it and I was like, oh shit, there's like, you could see the entire sequence of events. He's like, hey, hello, what? And then there's Mitch Green on the ground and shit.
And Mike standing over it. It was absolutely absurd. But I mean, I'm just thankful to be a part of that era. Like, I knew Mike from when he was, and even though when he came back and clearly he wasn't the same fighter, like, it was still that aura that he had. You know what I mean? Like, you still got glimpses of it when from McNeely, from when he absolutely one punched Buster Mathis. And then you saw the aura still exist that, like, when he fought Frank Bruno in the rematch, because Bruno, of course, we talked about Bruno in the British heavyweight series, was a good fighter. You know what I mean? And he gave Mike a credible fight in their first fight. But the dude was absolutely petrified in that rematch. You just saw it when he walked in. His head was
Yeah,
down.
he was at the end of his
Shaking.
career and
And
just fucking
yeah,
scared out of his mind.
he did not want to be there. And I mean, Mike looked even more menacing than he did when, before then.
Wasn't
Because
that the one where he made the sign of the cross like 50 times or something like that?
who, Mike or Bruno?
No, Bruno.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't it like before? I'm thinking it was before that fight where he was just sitting there like making the sign of the cross, like to the point where it was like, you're making some devil symbol now. The fuck you
Yeah.
doing?
And Mike just tore him up, shredded his eye. I was like, he made him look as good as he was going to look back then. But, and that's what made us all believe that too. We all watched that in real time. And then we saw the fiasco with Selden. But
Yeah,
again,
that was a
no,
wash.
absolutely. I mean, again, Selden was petrified or whatever
Yeah,
it was.
nothing even happened.
Yeah. Yeah. But damn.
Yeah, the mighty always fall, and the mighty have definitely fallen, but I guess it just had to be shoved in everybody's face. Like they're not gonna, I mean, quick question. Do you think they're gonna be able to sell something like that with Mike again? I mean, like I'm sure they will. You know what I'm saying? Like
I mean, against who though?
I'm sure there's some baseline bunch of idiots who are just no matter what going to buy a Mike Tyson fight, right? But like, you know what I'm
Against
saying?
who
Like,
though? Like, was he going to fight another one of these influencers?
and they're talking they're trying to really push fucking Evander Holyfield was saying blah blah blah, and Mike
Oh,
Tyson was saying
okay.
no no no, that's
Yeah.
not going to happen. But dude, if they offer him enough money,
Well, I mean,
Jesus
didn't weren't they
Christ.
like when Tyson came back for the Triller fight against Roy Jones, and then Holyfield was supposed to fight Kevin McBride. Remember that?
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah. Do you remember Holyfield was supposed to fight Kevin McBride before McBride fell out, and I guess they brought in Vito Belfort or whatever. I don't know how that whole thing. I don't know how Holyfield and Belfort got together. I forgot how that happened. Oscar was supposed to fight Belfort or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I mean, dude, Vitor would have absolutely decapitated Oscar, which is the hilarious. People didn't understand, dude. They think that these dudes, these MMA foos who've been taking testosterone replacement therapy for like 19 years are aging on the same level as some boxer who's been doing it since they were 5. Nah,
Mhm.
bro. These motherfuckers are on some next level genetic fucking medication, bro. You guys don't understand. So
Not
then
only that,
Veter gets in
Belfort
there
was
and
like
just
5 times
fucking
the size of
tools and just fucking some monster and shit. And people are like, oh, that's what was going to happen. He would have fucking killed him.
Yeah, bro, and like Vito actually has hands on like a dude like Shaq, and people are like, "Oh, it's
That was
just
his entire
no."
thing.
Yeah.
In
I
his
watched his,
heyday, he was a fucking puncher. That was his entire thing.
I watched his fight with Tank Abbott the other day, and he absolutely annihilated that. And Tank Abbott was still good back there with hands, and Vito was fast as shit. But regardless, yeah, I think their whole plan was to try to build the Tyson Holyfield 3 at that point. Triller was at least trying to do something like that. That was their whole game plan. What was that? It was going to be a build up, and then eventually those two.
Yeah, they pumped the brakes and went to
Yeah.
BKFC.
Well, there we go. But I'm like, honestly, I can't see that. Like, I think this has to be the end for Tyson. All right. He made
I
20
hope
million.
so,
What can he
bro.
do? Just go back to his podcast, making appearances, just settle out being an old man. And hopefully he keeps his, faculties intact because we've talked about not to get all solemn and stuff, but like we don't know how it's going to be in the next few years. You don't know when your brain suddenly decides to shift. You know what I mean? Like, look at George Chavallo, who for decades upon decades after his career ended, people were astounded by how like cognizant and well-rounded he was, and how he was able to like remember dates and facts and details of everything, and all of a sudden just completely gone. You know what I
Like how
mean?
lucid he was for the facing Ali thing. And then just
I
a few
mean,
years after that, yeah,
that dude was brilliant in facing Ali. Like he was my favorite part in that because like he just broke down everything and just knew it, like just fact for fact. And like they talked about a part. He was like, "Oh yeah." After the second fight, he was like, "I got in the ring and confronted Ali after the listing fight." And they showed that clip of it and the whole thing. Like, and he was like that in real. You know what I mean? If you met him back then too, same thing. Just gregarious, super nice guy, wonderful human.
the
Considering what he went,
largest jaw on the face of the planet.
giant fucking head, bro. Just looked like an absolute granite
Just a
step,
fucking unit.
boulder,
Yeah.
absolute boulder. But completely gone now. Willie Pep, same thing for years. He was really with it, and sharp, quick. Saw him at the Hall of Fame, funny, everything good for an interview. Near the end, gone. So you just don't know with these guys, and you listen to guys now like Evander Holyfield, who's clearly slowing down a lot. James Toney, who you can barely understand what he's saying.
Even
Poor
Shane,
Terry.
bro.
That's what I was going to get to. Terry Norris is another who, Terry Norris's issues has been diagnosed for years, so we've already know what he's been going through. And his wonderful wife, to his credit, has been by his side to help try to like mitigate, the progression of it. But yeah, he's another in Shane Mosley. Exactly. Shane is another one, especially over the past few years, who's like gotten seriously like heavy tongued when you listen to him talk. And he's being exploited now too. You saw that. He got put in some celebrity boxing shit where he beat up some schlub.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, and he looked like he was. I, I don't. Yeah, I don't even
Loaded,
want to joke
old.
about it. He didn't look good.
No, absolutely not. He had no business being in there. None of these guys have, even if it's for some bullshit where they're gonna knock over a can, they don't need to be in there doing that type of thing. They're gonna get punched in the head. One punch in the head is one punch too many that they need to take anymore. Like they don't need to take anything like that. And in Mike's sake, he's 58. Like, why take anything else? Just because he's Mike Tyson doesn't mean anything. Like, sure, he can knock out the average asshole on the street that's gonna try to fuck with him. But like other than that, why put him in a sanctioned fight with a guy who actually knows how to box? For what reason?
Yeah, it makes no sense, dude.
You know, if,
And you
yeah,
know,
if Netflix wants to keep up with this charade, then I don't know. They do another Jake Paul fight. I would watch Paul fight Carl Froch. All right,
well,
like,
and they're playing with fire too, doing that kind of shit because the backlash, if somebody were to actually get,
yeah,
injured or something, I don't think they'd understand, depending on, well, anyway, whatever. But uh just to kind of also talk about what you were addressing a second ago, I make a lot of jokes about Oscar De La Hoya, but dude started fighting when he was real young. He might have gotten out of boxing at thankfully a fairly early time compared to most fighters, but he's also been doing a lot of drugs and alcohol
mhm.
for a number of years. I'm just speaking factually, bro. Like, I don't give a fuck about what anybody's talking about or backlash. I don't really give a shit. Nobody's gonna do anything. Dude is got problems, and that exacerbates brain issues. So it could be literally at any time the dude just snaps or there's some sort of deterioration. Like I said, I'm not even trying to make a joke. I'm being serious. So point is that we're seeing a lot of people a lot of fighters who we grew up watching, or even at this point, not even grew up, but when we were already grown, we're already watching deteriorating. So anyway, before we swing it back into the kind of thankful and the positive, I am at the very least thankful that that shit was laid bare. Hopefully, that was enough of a sign for most people, and also seeing Mike Tyson's fucking 60-year-old ass flapping around on the screen for like 20 seconds straight as the cameraman's like zooming in on his fucking ass. Like,
That's
what the
been a
fuck,
meme
dude?
for ever
Pan
since that.
away. Pan away,
Bro.
Netflix. The fuck are you doing? I don't know what they were doing. But in any case, I'm thankful that that shit was laid bare enough that hopefully people get the idea that, like, stop. Just go to, you want to see fights? Just go to actual boxing or MMA or some shit. Enough with this, bro. Chill.
And the undercard fights were good enough. I mean, I'm glad Katie Taylor and Samantha Serrano.
Fucking, yeah. Great undercard and they're fucked it up.
Unfortunately, though, the worst part of that is that it was during that fight when Netflix first started having their issues, which was absurd. You know what I mean? Like it was bad too because I remember watching on my laptop and it started going wonky, and I thought it was my laptop at first.
Mine was actually
And
good like the entire time, but I saw other people were having issues. Yeah.
oh, it went really bad, and then it started jumping in various cutscenes and this and that. I had no idea what was going on to the point where we just ended up going to my friend's house to try to finish watching it. But it was bad. It was,
Dude,
I mean, for their first time, it's their first time trying to do it, so I'm trying to cut them a little
I
bit of slack.
know, I
Hey,
know. No, you're right, you're right. But bro, DAZN has not gotten better. You're somebody who actually knows about this shit because you've worked in boxing production. So like you're not like me, I'm just some random fucking guy. But I do recognize production issues and I can see when shit's going down and when they're just like throwing shit together and trying to fucking improvise. They were doing it the entire fucking show, bro. Again, I'm not trying to get on it, but dude, they had fucking Morrow screaming at people at a fucking microphone that was still live while they're like running promos and shit. I can't fucking hear, It's like, Jesus Christ, you guys, fucking Mickey Mouse operation shit. So anyway, yeah, that was not ideal. I hope that they really improve on a lot of that shit, but the fact that DAZN still is what it is makes me think they probably won't.
Don't even get me started on DAZN right now, bro. That's one thing we're not thankful. That's one thing we're not saying we're thankful for today.
No, not
Um,
really. No, not their production value anyway. But yeah, dude. I was trying to be jokey with the with the whole press release shit. But yeah, man, I mean, I guess just I don't think anything was fixed, nothing like that. It didn't need to be. Mike was old, but it was just hilarious that they would send a press release out ensuring everybody that it wasn't fixed. Weird. That being said, uh, there are other things to be thankful for in this entire thing, Eris.
Yeah, I mean, in the sport of boxing, there's always been a bunch of different things. I was watching, another thing I was like thankful for, I guess, is the fact that again, not to make us old jaded fans and be like, yeah, we've been around forever and ever and stuff like that, but at least we were around again coming up that because I've been watching a lot of these on like YouTube lately is we were around for like Tuesday night fights and Friday night fights for that matter too. But I mean, Tuesday night fights I hold more near and dear to my heart, I guess, than I do Friday night fights for a number of reasons, right? One, um, the commentary I prefer at Tuesday night fights over Friday night fights. Like Al Albert and Sean O'Grady were just great together. Don't get me wrong. Like
I did not appreciate them at the time, and I should have.
Teddy Atlas and Bob Popper, it was always Bob Popper and Teddy Atlas, right? More or less.
Yeah, Tessitore was like later,
Oh yeah, Testator came in after that too. I forgot about that. But
but
like
but it was Bob Papa and then Brian Kenny in studio for a long time.
that's right, yeah. And I like for what they were too. I mean, Bob Papa and Teddy Atlas definitely had a really good rapport to each other. And early on, before Teddy started going over the top with his character,
Yeah,
he was a good analyst. You know what I mean? Like he was always a good analyst for what it was. And then it just when he started getting popular and needed to embrace the character of like,
yeah.
then
He
it started
started
getting
turning into a barking idiot. Yeah,
exactly. But before that, he was good. But I don't know, man. Al Albert and Sean O'Grady were just smooth as shit with it. Like you can tell that they were good friends outside of the job. Like probably if they were lived next to each other, they'd be at each other's house every day having dinner or something, right? And it was just enjoyable. Like the whole atmosphere was like, yeah, they had suits on and it was a production, all that, but it was more laid back in the sense that like, unlike HBO or Showtime, they almost embrace chaos more. You know what I mean? Like the things that would happen on the show, for instance, like, remember the time Riddick Bowe and Elijah Tillery and Tillery got dragged over the ropes. I think that was the USA show, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, pretty sure that was the USA.
Yes, no, it had to be, and you know why? It's because they went to commercial, remember?
Yeah,
Right at
yeah.
the end of the round, and they had to fucking go back and be
So, like
like,
they
"So
went
this
fast
is what
forward.
happened."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So like you had an instance like that. Like there was another one too, again involving Riddick Bowe, where he was supposed to fight Ray Mercer at the time. And I don't know what happened, but there was like this big, discussion about so and so was ducking this one. And so they had Riddick Bowe, who just after he had just gotten done fighting. So it was Riddick Bowe and Rock Newman, his loud, obnoxious, goofy, so many other words you can use manager at the time. If you watch boxing back then, you definitely remember Rock Newman. And they're talking about why Ray Mercer turned on the fight and that they was trying to fight Ray Mercer. And Riddick Bowe's like, yeah, if the chicken wants to fight me, then he'll fight me. And blah, 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 blah. These two are like Olympians, and there's that photo of them posing together too with Roy Jones. I thought they were boys. I have no idea what happened where they started arguing. I guess because they were both heavyweights in the same division competing. No idea. But Riddick Bowe was like challenging him. Rock Newman was saying the same thing, and he was like, you know how Rock Newman used to talk, was all slow and try to be like, let me tell you how it is, okay? He was like, he was supposed to fight J.B. Williamson. In the J.B. Williamson fight, he bop, 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 and then Mark Roberts shows up. Mark Roberts was another obnoxious manager, except he represented Ray Mercer. He jumped in and started arguing, and before you know it, in the middle of Al Albert, Rock Newman, who was always a dude who always wanted to be touchy anytime he felt like he could be protected, he goes over, and then Mark Roberts is like, no, no, that's not how it goes, and then he gets shoved. Get out of my face! And then like he shoves him across, right?
He was always starting some shit.
Oh,
Always.
he's starting some shit. Yeah. Shoves him across. Roberts goes to push in. And Al Albert, unlike HBO, like you would hear Lampley, guys, we don't need to do this. Come on. Al Albert was like, y'all want to fight? Like, we can make this happen. Fuck it. like,
Let me
like they,
step out of the way, actually.
yeah, like he would embrace that stuff. Or like, remember when the late Tyrone Trice got into the ring after knocking out I forgot who he knocked out, Jay Bell or something like that. And he got in there and he started, and he
We
remember,
could do it right now.
yeah, yeah, he got into the ring and challenged James Toney. And Tony was like, man, bring your ass, Tyrone. We can do it right now. And you hear Alan Albert in the background of Sean O'Grady. We'd be fine with that. Let's do it. you know, but it was, it was one of those shows that like it was just built for fans. Like Boxing After Dark was built for fans. You know what I mean? I get that, but like Tuesday Night Fights was one of those shows that it just because again, it was like the club shows except brought to you on television. You know what I mean? Like they were held at the Blue Horizon. They'd be held in like somewhere in Mississippi or this place that. But it was never like in a giant venue. It always just seemed like a really small venue where you wish you were there. You know what I'm saying? Around that type of atmosphere, around real fans back then. It was just different. And that was just one of those things you could look forward to every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday, unless some kind of breach was happening or whatever was happening. But like almost every Tuesday, you can sit down and just know from 9 p.m. up until like 11:30 or whatever it was, you're going to get some quality action.
USA always had some quirky ass shit going on, like
Hmm.
as a network. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Let's-
Excuse me. Yeah, like the excuse me, the cartoons that they had were always kind of like weird cartoons. And then like the shows, like the original shows that they had were always like weird shows. And then like later on at night they had the like semi-adult shows compared to a lot of the other. It was like Fox before Fox or some shit. It was, because like Fox got the reputation in the 90s of being like, edgy or whatever. And that was like USA before Fox, basically. Yeah, USA always had some weird shit, but yeah, Tuesday Night Fights, that was like right when I first started fucking really watching boxing. They still had USA on. It was kind of toward the end of the run, but I do remember a bunch of shit. And then it kind of went like when USA stopped fucking doing shit, they like moved some of their crew, I guess it was probably over to Fox Sports Net and like,
This
kind of
wasn't,
carried no, no, yeah, no, no. They kind of carried on the tradition, but it was not the same. You
you
could
know,
tell the budget was way smaller.
it was like the Fox Sports shows. I don't have fond memories of the Fox Sports shows because one, they were held on Sundays. You know what I mean? Like it just they were whatever. And two, especially near the end of their run, they were like just sloppy heavyweight fights that weren't like good ones, like featuring guys like Lawrence Claybay or like a washed Kirk Johnson against like Javier Molina, or something like that. Like just not good fights that you're gonna sit there and be like, man, I really need to sit there and be home to watch that. Greg Page was featured a lot, like Greg Page. You know what I mean? Like guys like that. It was just not good to watch. But um, on Tuesday Night Fights, I mean sure, they had a little bit of everything. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they had like they feature the Philly guys that you wouldn't normally see on television, like Charles Brewer or other North America NABF or USBA champions from back then. You know what I mean? Like that was a big thing that they would feature. Like if they didn't have a world title fight on, which they did sometimes, not all the time, but they would feature world title fights once in a while. But if they didn't, almost every main event would feature like the regional belts, and that was the big thing. The guys that like the top 10 guys that if they back then when those belts meant something, if you held that title, chances are you're going to get a title fight or something big. And so almost every show would feature like an NABF title defense, a USBA title defense, you know what I mean? And with like really good fighters too. Like I said, Charles Brewer was a guy that came up on that. Brian Brandon was featured heavily on USA Tuesday Night Fights before he got decapitated by Roy Jones. The lower weight fighters that you would feature, like, the featherweight divisions, junior lightweight, stuff like that. And even guys like, you'd be able to see them for the first time on American television because Cedric played a big part, featuring guys on Tuesday Night Fights. So you would see sometimes a dude like Kennedy McKinney on TV, but then as opposed to McKinney, who was featured on network television because he was an Olympian, you would also get the chance to see for the first time Mubelo Botelli, for instance, who a lot of people had read about in magazines, but no one had really seen because, he's based out of South Africa. And here he was fighting in, I think it was Providence, Rhode Island or somewhere against Ansi Gideon, who was popular as a contender back then because he was known as the fighter who was homeless. He was living in Jesse Reed's gym while training and being the number one contender. So or Vianney Bungu, for instance, he was featured on Tuesday Night Fights. So in addition to like guys that you normally wouldn't see and like contenders that are on the rise, they also featured former champions who are on the comeback trail. Remember Larry Holmes? Every other time you would see Holmes, he would and usually make his comeback on Tuesday Night Fights, knock out some schleb and then say he was retired. Roberto Duran would be on Tuesday Night Fights all the time. Vinny Paz made his comeback on Tuesday Night Fights, and then he would fight on there often through that. Like these were guys that would just, it was just such a good ass show back then, man. And like we said, the commentary, and they just had like, and everything was like set up in a certain way. They always started out with Just for Starters, which was like their 4 round fight featuring a prospect against, either a fellow prospect or a guy like that just need to pad their record with. And then they would have depending on how quick that fight went, they would have a second fight and then the co-main event, then the main event. And there would always be like things in between, interviews and all that. And the commercials too, right? When you see the random celebrities in the audience, like Charlie Sheen or somebody, Tuesday night fights really knocks me out.
Dude, and unfortunately, a number of the YouTube channels that had a bunch of those like full shows and stuff like that
They're
have
all
either
gone.
been
Yeah.
taken down or, hidden or whatever, which sucks, but there's still some around. Yeah, I do miss the variety that we had.
It was cool, man. Like, O'Grady, there's a lot of former champions, a lot of former fighters who just don't pan out as analysts. I get why they give you a shot, especially if you're a popular fighter who is a good fighter, because maybe you can bring some insight to, the commentary of what you see or whatever. But some guys just don't know how to articulate that well, how to talk about it for various reasons. They're just not in their personality or whatever it may be. But O'Grady was one of those guys that, like, it translated. He talked great. You know what I mean? Some people found him a little hokey in his talks or whatever it may be, but like, he was always good. He brought really good perspective to a fight. Usually he was spot on. He didn't make as many like what the fuck comments like George Foreman did. And he got out of the ring early enough at such a young age because he was a professional at like Benitez age, you know what I mean, super young, that he had all his looks intact. Like he still looked good for the camera and all that.
Yeah, despite coming from an insane boxing family, that as he
Yeah.
himself has noted. Now he did well in the position. Like I said, I couldn't like appreciate it at the time, but I should have.
And I would say too that probably helped him stay retired as well, like having a steady gig as an analyst like that. I'm sure you get the edge all the time being there, but to his credit, he never came back. And he was
That's
young enough definitely to do it.
that's actually a really good point, dude. And that is something that boxing does not do nearly as much as it used to. I mean, for various reasons, the sport of boxing does not employ nearly as many people as it used to overall, whether media, like promotional stables and like in like PR stables and stuff like that have been gutted, etc. So I mean, yeah, there are fewer opportunities for like ex fighters, and that's a really good point.
Yeah. And it just worked for him, because after, like you said, Tuesday night fights ended, he did move on to Fox Sports and he did like the Sunday night fights over there for a number of years. And I remember him also too, like sometimes he would do a random pay-per-view for whatever it may be. And he also did Tough Man. Do you remember that?
Hell yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah, the new Tough Man that was on FX, not the one that like, with Butterbean and all that. I think they were even wearing
Yeah,
this one, but
yeah. They
he
tried to like organize it into like a league, kind of.
yeah, yeah.
I remember that shit.
There was one guy that used to beef with him all the time. Unfortunately, the guy turned out to be an absolute fucking maniac who went to jail for life for sex trafficking. Um Hardbody Harrison, remember that name?
That sounds really familiar.
So he was a former WCW wrestler, kind of a jobber per se, and went to Tough Man, knocked out a bunch of dudes on it. Had like a little feud with Sean O'Grady because he played his wrestler persona. He played a heel and he used to talk shit with him. You know what I mean? And initially, I'm not even gonna lie, like watching those old clips, they are kind of funny the way he would yell out O'Grady, "Shut up,
I
shut up!"
I definitely remember that fucking guy. I just looked him
Yeah,
up right now because he was the one who had the pork chop
yeah,
that he
yeah,
called one of
yeah,
his
yeah,
punches the pork
yeah,
chop.
yeah. The pork chop,
Fucking
yeah.
remember that shit.
And he
That's
had
right.
like he used to wear like the one-legged tights, like one tight would be all the
Yep.
way down leg and the other one was like
And it
exposed.
was
But
like he was good because he was
yeah, he was
fucking
a
actually an athlete and could
yeah.
fuck. Yeah, I remember that shit.
Hmm.
Oh shit, I couldn't even remember that guy's name. That's fucking
But yeah, no, he's in jail for life now for what he did. It was bad,
well.
bad.
Then fuck him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely piece of shit human, absolute piece of shit human. But yeah, O'Grady made out well for himself. Al Albert, I don't remember him doing much after boxing. I might be forgetting something he was into, but
Nah, I don't even fucking remember. Like I said though, that was kind of weird how like, at least part of the team seemed to kind of transition to Fox Sports Net and then some of them just kind of dispersed or I mean like,
sure. But I mean,
um
in terms of like we came up right after the popularity of the networks, right? Like sure, when we were watching boxing in the in the mid 90s when we were getting into the sport, there was still fights on ABC. There was still fights on I don't know if I ever saw a fight on NBC. I can't recall.
no.
I don't NBC
No,
sucked.
ABC and NBC got out after the fucking the Don King scandal. Like, I
No,
mean, there
ABC
might have
still
been like occasional shows or something like that, but they were out, dude.
ABC definitely still showed fights because I think the last one I watched on ABC was Stevie Johnston Castillo one.
Yeah, there might have been some like, occasional shows or
Yeah, I mean, it
cards or
wasn't like it
something,
wasn't
but
like every week and stuff like
yeah.
that, but they did have
Well, and
fights.
and there
Definitely.
were times during the 2000s too where there were kind of like, like 5 show deals or whatever. Remember like the Budweiser boxing series?
Oh yeah, I don't
Yeah,
count.
like there were some shit that they did, but it just didn't last. Like,
Sure.
yeah,
But no, I
wisely.
remember. I remember like the the wide world of sports. They did have a few times they were boxing on it. There was that one I watched the other day on YouTube. It was Eddie Hobson, Tracy Patterson. That was on ABC, and saying it was funny too because like okay, saying it was like the weird network stuff that they were talking about, like the stuff that they were airing because not Alex Wallow, was it Dan Dierdorf? Was that his commentating partner?
Probably, yeah.
Like he's giving like the preview of what's coming on after the show and stuff like that, and he's like General Custer, he was like did this and that, but he found love life. Watch this at 7 p.m. after tonight's airing. Before that, after that's gonna be Murder She Wrote, and then from there, blah, 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 blah.
It's
It's
a
like,
TGIF
yeah.
Friday here on the ABC. We have Family Matters followed by Full
He was
House.
like, now back to IBF Junior Lightweight Champion Eddie Hobson in the corner over here. We're gonna be talking to Eddie after this.
Now back to Killer Johnson versus.
Yeah. So we missed, that era, like the network television era that guys like Lee Groves and other older fans fondly can go back and talk about. But that being said, at least we still had Tuesday night fights. We weren't there for the entire run of it, but we were there long enough that we were able to have a hold on that, watch that shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we can at least remember a time when one you had to fucking like turn on your TV to see what was on TV and what the flip through channels and shit like that, and that there were actually channels and then fucking not instant access to everything, which again me already said we're very thankful for. But yeah, there's been a change. There's been a little bit of a change.
So
So I would say my last entry here is that I mean I guess I'm not being very I'm being somewhat modern about it, and I'm also being somewhat obvious because if anybody follows me on social media or has seen my posts recently, they know that I'm very thankful for eBay. I'm very thankful, and the sellers are thankful for me. I can definitely fucking confirm that shit because they send me shit all the time like, "Hey, here's an offer." And I'm like, "Bro, leave me alone. I'm already sitting among a fucking pile of goddamn magazines." But, it's I am actually thankful and I know that Eris is too. There is so much more access to just random stuff and memorabilia and etc. through places like eBay at this point. And even before like the last maybe I would say few months, I mean, I already had probably, I would imagine, like somewhere between 150 and 200 magazines, which is a substantial amount, but I've probably like quadrupled that or something like that in the last few months, which is, like I made the woo fucking thing earlier. That's what that is. That's me being crazy and obsessive. But I am grateful because you also brought it up earlier. Turkey El Sheikh talking about digitizing the ring and stuff like that. And that makes me kind of uncertain about what's going to happen with the ownership rights of the archives and, a lot of this information to you and I, especially, but it's valuable to us and we feel as though it's valuable in general. And so I'm happy that I'm able to fucking, help try to keep some of this information alive because I think it's important.
totally. I just had like I'm the same way when it comes to eBay and like these different sites and all that in terms of just adding to my ridiculous collection of fight shirts and other random things that I try to find, right? But eBay has been around for a long time when you think about it. It's kind of crazy how long eBay's been around. It's been around basically since like the advent of the internet. Like internet was like I don't know when the internet first I don't know the exact date of when it first started or whatever, right? But like we all started getting AOL in our households. What? When did you get it? Mid 90s, 96-ish?
Yeah, like probably like 95 or 96 or something like
Yeah, right. And we all got the same thing, like that free disc trying to try it out and the whole
that. 30 hours.
yeah, yeah, the phone. and all that. Yeah, my dad. I think we got ours through like from my dad working in like the New Bedford school department, and like you hear it too. I was like New Bedford school.
Don't use the phone. Nobody
Yeah,
can use the phone right now.
or like my mom, just get off the internet. I have to call your aunt.
Yeah,
But
straight up. I'm supposed to get a phone call. Stop fucking
yeah,
looking at shit. What the fuck?
so that was I remember soon after a few years after that, like I started learning about what eBay was and stuff. I still even then I didn't know what was being sold on eBay. And it sucks too, because I can't even imagine the old fight shirts that were being put on there back then. Fuck, dude. Regardless, don't even want to think about it. But the first thing I did ever buy on eBay was that it was a VHS tape of random fights because that's what I heard you can do. They're like, oh, you should check on V8. You're like, you should check on eBay to see if people have fights. Because back then I was obsessed with trying to find a Salvador Sanchez footage. Even it took a few years to even find a photo of him because there was no photos of him in that Nat Fleischer book I talked about. There was no photos of him in other
There
books.
still even really aren't that many. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, honestly.
I just found him to be kind of fascinating. The fact that I read that he knocked out Azuma Nelson, and then because I loved Nelson growing up, and then finding out he died super young makes someone intriguing. You want to find out about him. And then when I first saw a photo of him and to see him, barefaced with an afro, and for whatever reason in my head, I had him looking like every other Mexican fighter, like a guy that either had like the mustache, facial hair, just looking like a tough ass dude who threw hooks to the body. You know what I mean? Not like a regular fresh faced dude with a Popeye chin and an afro. And I'm just like, damn, that's him. And so became more intrigued. And so a few years later, I think I forgot who I was talking to, probably someone at the gym or whatever. And they told me to look out eBay and they said sign up. And I had to convince my parents to do it because they're like, oh, what's that? Really putting buying things online? What's
I
buying
remember I had my
online?
mom,
Yeah.
yeah, buy me some shit on eBay too when I was like 18 or 17 or something.
They gave you the same weird speech being all skeptical about it.
Yeah, the buying things off the internet.
Yeah,
That because
exactly.
back then that was like,
Yeah, what the
meeting
hell was
someone
that?
off the internet.
Exactly. Same thing. Like people were still doing writing checks and money orders, back then. So, um,
Yeah, back then if you were on the internet, you were fucking weird.
yeah. So I remember I went on, absolutely you were. So I remember I went on eBay and I found a VHS tape that had, excuse me, not only did it have Salvador Sanchez, Wilfredo Gomez, but it had Wilfredo Gomez against Lupe Pintor and Zarate Zarate Zamora, and I think maybe one other fight. But like
Damn, that'd be a
four
hell of a fucking tape. Yeah.
four fucking bangers on VHS, right? And I was like, oh snap, this is awesome. I get to watch all these fights for the first time. I was like super excited, you know what I mean? And I think I bid on it and I ended up beating some guy by like 1 second for like 20 to 25 bucks I paid for it. I ended up coming in, got it, watched the whole thing. I didn't buy anything off eBay for a number of years. But fast forward now, like you're saying, when I don't really go like I'm a big vintage hunter. Like I love buying vintage stuff. As you know, anyone that listens to the show probably know me and for my personality. I love vintage. But boxing vintage stuff has been on my radar for a number, the past like decade. And when I really started getting into it, I just it's been crazy the stuff you can find out there. You know what I mean? Like you just never know. And not just with eBay, but almost any other type of website. Because whether people have it and they don't know what they have, or just people just selling shit, like if you're dedicated and looking for certain things, it's almost incredible what you can find for like good prices. I mean, sometimes you gotta pay like a pretty penny for certain things, but sometimes it's worth it to pay that because you'll never see it again. You know what I mean? I just grabbed two shirts off the top of my thing that I've bought over the years and these are two shirts that I probably will never see again. The first shirt I've seen for sale twice. That's it. And chances are it'll never come up again for me. And that's like the Night of Gold. You see these fighters wearing this shirt too in a couple of promo
Yep.
photos. This was the shirt the night that they turned pro at MSG, and you got
Which was just the anniversary was just the other day.
yeah, exactly. Which I don't really post on Twitter like that, so I didn't post it. But that night you had Breland, Holyfield, Meldrick Taylor, Biggs, Whitaker, and I want to say a couple other guys. Maybe Virgil Hill turned pro that night.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think maybe Virgil Hill did, but I'm not positive.
It's funny they didn't put him on the shirt. They
For
found him.
whatever dude, he was for whatever reason, he was almost never in any of the photos or promos with him, which I'm like, damn, fool got moted, bro, being from North
And,
Dakota.
fun, and funnily enough, he ended up having like a bigger following. than almost all those guys. Well, besides Holyfield, because of just him being in North Dakota.
And he was one of the fighters in one of those issues of I don't think it was actually I don't think it was KO. I want to say it might have been like Boxing Illustrated, but regardless, it was an earlier issue, and they were talking about fighters that they thought would and wouldn't get into the Hall of Fame, and they were like Virgil Hill, nah. And I was like,
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember that.
Jesus, okay.
And he got in pretty quickly. Like it did not take him
Dude,
many
he
years.
had a very good career. It's not his fault that he didn't have like a, great division to operate in, but he had a very good career.
And not only that, to his credit, after he lost to Roy Jones, had his fucking rib broken and lost to Mikucheski, and it looked like it was the end of the road for him. When he moved up to cruiserweight,
Still came back.
yes, moved up to cruiserweight, fought Tioso in Fabrice Tioso in a rematch. So he beat Tioso the first time in defense of his belt, year back in the like 93 or something like that, but it was a really close fight. Tioso after that went on to beat Mike McCallum in a massive upset, and then make a number of defenses of the light heavyweight title, move up to cruiserweight, win that, and it was just kind of pondering around, plodding along, but still being essentially the class of that division at the time. And the late 90s, early 2000s, when the cruiserweight division was absolute fucking dreck. I'm not even gonna front. That division sucked around 99, 2000. But Virgil Hill moved up to fight him in a rematch. Hill was looked like he was on the downside. Tioso was the guy that clearly had been on the upswing over the years. And I think Hill was like a 15 or even more to one underdog in that fight. Like he was a massive underdog, like bad. And he ends up scoring a first round knockout.
Yeah, and he wasn't a big puncher, not even at light heavyweight, not a big puncher, more of
Like
like a
he
technician.
Yeah, he just bowled him over completely. But that probably really pushed him over the edge for that Hall of Fame thing too. But you know, so you had that one, and then like another one. So I've accumulated over 100 like over 100 shirts now in various different things. That's all just because of like what people are going to be selling on there, right? And then this one I consider my crown because it's the oldest one I own, and I definitely will never see this again. Is an original Ali Foreman shirt from Zaire with the original date of September on it instead of the October one after, Foreman got injured. And this is just like museum worthy. You know what I mean? Like this is something that should be hanging up, I don't know, in the
And
Smithsonian or
some of those
something.
motherfuckers you showed me are crisp as fuck too, dude. Like,
Yeah,
cause I
yeah.
mean, some of this shit's like 50 years old, bro.
Absolutely. This just turned 50 years old, this one. So what I'm saying is that like I never thought back then I would have been able to have access to these type of shirts or these type of things. And I mean, it's not like I'm grabbing like fight worn equipment like Joe Lewis's trunks from Max Smelling or something like that. But this is like stuff that still means a lot to me in my own way. I'm still preserving history because these are all this is all like, shirts that, well, all historical things, you know what I mean? Like I have a shirt from every single fight from the Four Kings of all their from their series, you know what I mean? Like Larry Holmes shirts, Hagler, this, other guys from the past, like just anything that you can really find, you know what I mean? Like I'm just all about that. And the hunt always continues. But the beauty of the internet is that like there's always that chance that one day I will find it, you know what I mean? Like my goal, my holy grails now, since from the ones I found, I would still do anything to find an Aaron Pryor shirt, like a Hawk Time shirt, which surprisingly has eluded me all these years. I've never seen one for sale. I would love to own a Matthew Sad Muhammad shirt. Same thing, never seen one for sale. Nothing ever pops up. I know they exist because clearly you see them wearing them. You know what I mean? And that's the thing I think about. I'm like, yo, I see these guys wearing them in their things. They were sold at one point. These dudes were massively popular. Someone has this in their closet somewhere. It's just sitting somewhere. Where do I find you, and how do you give it? How do I convince you to sell it to me? But it's crazy. It's crazy though what you can find though on the internet, like right now in terms of eBay or Etsy or Depop, Grailed, wherever it may be. There's like tons of crazy shit that's for sale.
You look in the old boxing magazines and stuff like that. You and I've talked about it, how there's like ads for
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
VHS and sometimes also there's ads for old posters, there's ads for programs and gloves and stuff like that. And there's even ads for people going like, I'll take your old shit. Like, oh, if you're just trying to get rid of stuff, send it to me and stuff like that. So I mean, like it's crazy to think about how much memorabilia has gone through hands over the years, how much stuff we missed out on because of eBay and all that type of stuff. But even so, it is wild the amount of shit that we can encounter and the type of stuff that we can collect. And I mean, not everybody's into collecting. And I feel as though, and of course it could just be me deluding myself, but I feel as though at least there's a purpose behind my collecting and that I'm not just doing it aimlessly. Maybe I'm just, blowing myself up and I really am just doing it aimlessly. But in the grand pantheon of things to collect, we both could be collecting far more damaging or awful things than we are. And so that being said, I'm definitely thankful that we're able to fucking get our hands on stuff like that.
Yeah, you just never know, what you can find. I mean, I collect other stuff too, not just fight shirts, like anything I can find interesting when it comes like boxing memorabilia. And you recall during the summertime, for instance, I found that press kit for Sanchez Gomez, which is absolutely insane to think about because like where would that even come from? Who owned that? Where, you know what I mean? Like it's not one of
I'm
those
not
things.
even saying that I've seen his entire collection. I have not at all. So he probably has stacks of shit I can't even imagine. But I
Oh,
have seen some photos that Grant Elvis Phillips has posted,
oh
and
yeah.
I've never seen him post a fucking picture of that.
No, I've never seen a photo of one either. Like it's never seen it. And Dan Raphael wrote a whole column on it recently during the anniversary, talking because he has a collection of stuff too, and he was talking about how he's fascinated by that fight, and he said that the press kit is something he's never seen for sale, and that if anyone had one out there to reach out to him. But um, yeah, that's the thing is that like the beauty of eBay or like is that sometimes these people have these things where they get them in estate sales or they just get them from whatever it may be, some garage sale or some shit like that. They don't know what they have and they just put it up there. Like the person that sold the press kit, for instance, not to go into detail too much, but like what they put up, they're clearly a collector's site. Like they had a bunch of other different things. And remember, I was sending you stuff because they clearly fell into a boxing a lot. Like they were selling magazines and other programs and
Yeah,
all
they
that.
get shit on
So,
consignment, dude. Entire fucking, estates, like you said.
mhm. And the person that like, but the thing is, how I knew they had no idea what they had was just in the description. It was like a general description. This Sanchez Gomez promo was clean. Would look great with anyone's collection. With blah 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 blah. Not giving you actually details and all that. You know what I mean? It was just saying like they gave you details inside the photos of what it was, but like they didn't tell you what it was. Like they have no fucking idea what it was, right? But I saw it and it started bidding was like $50 and it was there for like 5 days. And I just watched it, realized that there was some heavy hitters on there because they had like scores of like over 2,000 and stuff like that. And clearly, they were collectors themselves. But I'm like, fuck that. They're not getting this. And I just waited until like the last 10 seconds and put up a wild bid. And luckily I won it for like $100 or something. But I mean, yeah, that's something definitely be thankful for.
It's crazy. Yeah, dude, the amount of stuff, like I said, there will just be like estates. That's how I came across some of the original artwork from a number of the issues of The Ring, for the covers of the issues of The Ring from like the 1930s and 40s. I came across in an estate sale that was going around the IBRO, because we'll get emails about people getting rid of stuff, or do you know any sellers and nobody interested, blah, blah, blah. Came across an estate sale that had like an insane, actually there was an insane amount of boxing stuff. It was just that was specifically what somebody was looking for. But I mean, yeah, dude, they're collectors. And I mean, if you think about that, just one of us, like, or me, I collect all of this shit, and if I were to just die tomorrow, what the fuck would my family do for me? My kids aren't gonna fucking want that shit. They're gonna be like, bunch of magazines, get rid of that shit. So what are they gonna sell them to? They're gonna look for somebody to get rid of them to, blah blah blah. It's crazy. It's crazy how it all disperses.
Really is. But I guess to finish off with anything you're thankful for, not to sound all sappy and shit, but just thankful for the listeners of the show too, man. You know what I mean? When it comes down to it, you and I have been doing this show for, I don't know, Jesus, long enough that I can't even remember, probably a decade now.
I
From
mean,
just
it's if it's
from
not a
from
decade, it's pretty fucking close.
yeah, from doing like doing the phone thing to doing the other stuff now to how we do it on the internet, how we do it on YouTube. But like people that have just been around and watching us and listening along for all this time, appreciate you and hopefully you've gotten something out of it.
Not for sure, dude. Likewise, I appreciate you. I say that at the end of the show, pretty much every show, but it is true. I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that you are as into this shit as I am. And I also appreciate the fact that there are viewers and listeners out there who, I mean, we probably would do very similar shit regardless of, even if there weren't viewers or listeners, even if it's, and we've mentioned this on the show, we'll just like shoot the shit about boxing history all the time. So there's a good chance we'd do it anyway. But having people like encouraging and into it, clearly into it, and enjoying it makes it feel, gives us extra motivation to do it more. And like, oh, maybe also feels like we have a responsibility to kind of like keep putting this out there. That we're, I mean, not so much this episode because we just kind of fucked around, but there are episodes where I feel as though we are giving information that's like factual and that people don't already know. And that's, in my opinion, important. So I'm grateful that
Yeah.
people are interested.
Yeah, and I always try to say that like that I can't be the sole person to do this, and thank God I found you for that too. Is that like after Hank passed away and after spending so much time with him, and realizing he's the type of dude I want to be like if you're gonna be a historian. And I mean, and what I mean by that is that like not like a lot of people, and I know this is like this goes in every sport, not just boxing, but since we're only in boxing, we experience it on this end. There's a lot of historians who just don't want to share that information, want to be dickheadish about it, and just be like, you know what, this is our club. You're not allowed in. You don't need to know about this type of stuff. Stay with whatever, right? They're so closed-minded and not open to the fact that other people want to be involved in that. You know what I mean? And Hank was never like that. Hank just, if you showed any type of interest, especially if you were younger, he would embrace that because who's going to carry on the mantle after he's dead? Who's going to carry on the mantle after his friends are dead? If you guys keep on like safeguarding it and blocking it and not allowing anyone else to read this stuff and like making it difficult to gain access to your information, then what's going to happen when you all pass away? Is it just going to go away into a safe and no one knows this stuff? Like what the fuck? But he always, he would always be open to anyone trying to learn and wanting to teach and all that. And if as long as you're willing to hear about it, then he'd be enthusiastically would teach you or try to give you access to what he had to whatever you need to find. And also that too, his main purpose was to always make sure the forgotten people would be remembered in the sport because that's out of all the sports that you can really think of, boxing's one of the biggest ones where because it's been around for so fucking long, hundreds of years that so many people have just been falling through the cracks. There's been millions of fighters over the years that only, thousands and thousands and thousands of all these great fighters that no one even remembers. Hell, I'm learning about new fighters every day that I never heard of that had fantastic careers. I'm just like, what the hell? Who is this guy? And, it was Hank's duty to always try to remember him. That's why he had all these files down there from A to Z that was like miles long of all these type of things because he wanted to keep these guys these records and make sure they weren't forgotten. And I almost feel like now it's my duty and and hopefully others feel the same way to try to keep that alive. And that's what we do with the show. You know what I'm saying? Is to keep these try to like we do shows on like Bill Sharkey or on the time Ratman uh
Ruben Bell.
yeah, Ruben Bell, or we talk about the quarries, even though they're not forgotten, but just like things like that, you know what I mean? Like we're making sure, Jeff Sims, like we're just making sure that boxing's forgotten guys, because they were characters themselves, still have a name.
Anybody can do, and hey, look, dude, they have
Yeah,
their place, but
sure.
anybody can do a show about Floyd Mayweather. Anybody can do a show about how Gervonta Davis is ducking so and so. Anybody can do a show about that. And they do have their place. And they do help drive the current fandom of boxing, whether people like it or not.
Mhm.
And they do have their shows, but we're not doing those kinds of shows.
Yeah.
And because, like you said, we're more into, uncovering things or learning things ourselves, like kind of that's part of what we're doing. It's like we're not even like I think that hopefully people are getting the vibe that we're not sitting here with our hands on our hips going, let me tell you a little something about the fucking history. We're trying to say, look, this is what we learned, and this fucking cool as fuck. Check this out. Hopefully that enthusiasm is coming across and it's not crotchety and it's not crusty and fucking jerky because that's not what we want to do. And in fact, we're trying to avoid doing that because we feel as though we've experienced far too much of that coming from and I mentioned this the other day, on Bluesky for, people who are on there. I mentioned the other day just that it's really frustrating that the old guard or whatever has kind of gate kept a lot of this information. So hopefully people do not get the vibe that we're doing that. But anyway, let's finish this up. Aris, I appreciate you once again, bro. I do appreciate the listeners, and it was a good time. We kind of kept it loose, but
Yeah.
sometimes you
Oh,
just gotta do that shit.
yeah.
Everybody, thanks so much for listening in. We do appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe on whichever podcast app you listen on. Leave us a comment, rating, etc. YouTube, if you watched, thanks so much. Same thing. Subscribe, comment, blah blah blah. Social media, etc. You know the deal. Eris, talk to you soon, bro.
Happy Thanksgiving.